is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. I am at the home studio for the first time in, must be 3 months. And so, because of that, by the way, I came home, I have a cat, and my cat sitter, I was lucky enough to have a cat sitter, didn't live here, but came 3-4 times a week. Cats really know how to express their anger at you when you leave them for 2 months in the form of peeing wherever they want. Now, I have hardwood floors, so that's fine, but they find every pile of laundry. I've been doing laundry for the last week. It has been awful. So I wanted my first show to be a friend of the show, and I consider her a friend of the show. And I can't wait to talk to her. She is a minister. She is an author. She is the former MPP for Parkdale High Park, and an all-around, I would say she's kind of like a political savant, in my view. I really wish she would get back into politics, too. But her name is Cheri DiNovo. Cheri, how are you?
Yes, I'm good. I'm good, James. Long time no see. This is exciting.
It has been a long time. I hope everything's going well with you. Things in this country are very strange right now. And I want to start with Ontario and ask you whether or not you think Doug Ford is experiencing not just hubris, but maybe well-founded hubris. He doesn't seem to be negatively impacted politically by the Greenbelt scandal. He has recently announced that he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, I think my ideological equals should be judging criminal courts and only my ideological equals. So I'm going to put staffers on the committee that appoints judges. What's going on? What are we witnessing? And I always like to blame apathy, but what do you think we're witnessing right now in this province?
Well, first of all, I mean, look at the scandals. I mean, not only Greenbelt, but I mean, putting a mega spa, giving them all our money to do it, moving. I mean, Highway 413. I mean, there's one after the other, and now moving government offices to Staples and Walmart. I mean, this is over the top. And this is just giving, I mean, this is, I'll be careful with my words here, but I mean, this is something the RCMP should look into, because come on, like this is this episode of The Sopranos, really only housed at Queen's Park. So why isn't this affecting his polling numbers is the question. And by the way, the least of it, I think, is him admitting, being honest, saying, I'm going to put staffers in that are going to do my bidding onto committee that chooses judges. Quite frankly, every civil service, appointment of any high level done by majority government is going to be partisan. I remember sitting on a committee when I was there that was one of those committees to choose civil servants. But of course, we were in the minority because we weren't the majority government. So, number of people around. And one of the Conservative members said to the candidate, have you now or ever been a member of the Liberal Party? And we all started laughing because the joke was that of course they have. Otherwise, they wouldn't be sitting there, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, everybody does this. It's kind of a known thing. Now,
so hold on. Was that a McCarthy era joke? Is that what that was?
No, that was like a Kathleen Wynne era joke. Okay. So, I mean, I'm just saying every party with power will skew, appointments to people in their party. It's what people do. Look at the Senate. The Senate is a perfect example of how that works. So even if they're called independent, they're not really, right? So so he was being honest, stupidly, of course, but honest. I just wish he'd be honest about all the other, deals that he makes with his friends, and saying, of course I'm going to deal with my friends. Who else would I deal with,
Yeah.
So that's where it's at. One hopes that judges, because they take an oath, even if they vote Conservative, actually judge cases on the merits of the case. That's the hope. Because they all vote one way or the other. So nobody's unbiased, right? So yeah, that's the least of his problems. Why polling? To get back to the question, so why polling is I think this is kind of halo effect of the even worse Poilievre influence on the polls. First of all, the Conservative Party has more provinces, more money, more power than any other party in the country right now. So they've got the strategists, they've got really high paid, really efficient strategists that pays for ads, pays for lots of stuff. And Poilievre has some pretty brilliant, I'm saying this because I'm Italian, so I can be a bit Machiavellian, got some brilliant strategists working for him, right? And they don't come cheap. So I think it's kind of, I don't know what the opposite of halo effect is, whatever the opposite is.
The pitchfork effect?
Yeah. Pitchfork, maybe. Right. Yeah, effect in Ontario from the federal reality. But
that's different. That's different than how it used to be, right? Like it used to be, like if you go back to the 70s and 80s and maybe even the 90s, if there was a conservative premier in Ontario, the country often went liberal and vice versa. I think there's a new group of political activists right now on the right that, first of all, they're probably not familiar that was kind of the trend, and they're probably thinking that maybe we can pool our resources and just keep voting these people in and we'll have a trifecta if they can get, a conservative mayor next time in Toronto or something. Like they just it feels like it's interesting because when I was young, I was always thinking like, oh, if more people become politically active, then, we'll be sensibly progressive, this country. And it turns out if only a small fraction of people become politically active, you can just tilt everything to the right. Yeah.
And not only that, but what's really scary is the rise in conservative voters among the young. Because it used to always be old conservative, middle-aged, liberal, young NDP or something. That's no longer the case. And that's really kind of terrifying. Part of the blame lies with mainstream media, by the way. So I'm glad you're not part of the mainstream, James.
Oh, they won't have me, Cheri. They won't have me.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, hallelujah. So I just came back. I was with some relatives down in Southern California, and usually I hate American media of any sort, but down there was really interesting. MSNBC is just 24/7 anti-Trump, like 24/7 smashing and Trump, and then you got Fox that pro-Trump, right? Up here, you come up here, you got National Post, you got the Sun, you got right-wing media, and not to mention the Prouds, you got all of that happening, and then you've got CBC and the Star trying to be neutral. Like, where does that get us? I mean, CBC is going to be out of work when Poilievre gets to, they should be fighting with everything they have, tooth and nail, against this guy, and they're not. They're pretending to be, nice Canadians, or we're in the middle somewhere. So it was very disconcerting coming back, I have to say, for the first time ever. Yeah.
I often say that there's the new conventional wisdom in politics is that there is no conventional wisdom in politics anymore. Now, that's a broad statement, but what I mean by that, and I'll give you an example, since you mentioned Poilievre. It used to be, it was like this with Aaron O'Toole. It was like this with Andrew Scheer, where when they run for leadership, they really court heavily the far right. And then when it comes to the general election, they sort of linger back to the center, or at least they're not as demonstrative with their support about far right issues. I feel like those days are done. I feel like Poilievre is never going to inch back to the center during an election. I think he feels like he's tapped into a MAGA North kind of pulse in this country, and that he's going to be the first conservative in my memory that is going to run a campaign that is decidedly far right. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. He's a Trumpling. That's who he is. And that's who we'll get if you elect him out there. So, that's exactly who he is. And what's terrifying about that is the rise of the right is not just in Canada. Of course, we see it in North America. Trump, last time I checked the polling down there, was leading in most of the swing states anyway. It's in Europe, in the Netherlands, who would have thought that? In New Zealand, who would have thought that? In Argentina, so it's spreading around the world. This is a global movement to keep billionaires as billionaires, and one of them is going to be a trillionaire soon. So we know there's huge money behind this. I used to say that fascism is the last gasp of capitalism. So maybe that's what we're saying here again. Everything old is new again. But that is certainly what's happening globally, not just here. And so you've got Russian bots on board. Like all these guys stick together. They go to the same spas.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to Jon Stewart last week talk about Tucker Carlson in Russia. And Tucker Carlson's like, look how amazing these subways are. Look how cheap groceries are. And they're like, yeah, but people only make a couple $100 a week in Russia. But he made one good point. And this speaks to me. This speaks more to not that one side is right and one side is wrong, but how polarized we are. Because Stuart framed it as like Putin is so unwoke that the far right in North America have deemed him as being a great leader of sorts because he's unwoke. And I can't, first of all, that's obviously absurd to actually, first of all, put any faith in a dictator like Vladimir Putin. But then I start to think, and I always do this to myself because I want to know how much responsibility does each side sort of have towards an issue. And sometimes I feel like we don't do enough talking about the issues in depth in order for the public to sort of make an educated opinion or a comment or whatever. So when I look at all the money that Justin Trudeau is spending on military aid to Ukraine, I don't know why we just have to accept that number as being something that the good guys need to accept. Why isn't there more of an effort for to explain to Canadians how they came up with the figure of, like, I think it's $3 billion or something like that, and how it's going to help our national security, what it means as far as the people of Ukraine goes. Like, are we able to be pro-Ukraine without saying, well, maybe it can be $1.5 billion? Like, are we allowed to have that opinion anymore, or are those days gone?
Well, the problem with that war, of course, is it's a proxy war. And it always threatens, as all proxy wars do, to become a more general war, and so that's terrifying. And the other thing is that it's a war that, in terms of the NATO powers, has to be won. But what if it can't be won? So that, where is the urge to maybe talk? There were talks that before all this got going. Russia's concern is, of course, they become part of NATO, that they're aligned and not with them. And there's always been this history between Russia and Ukraine anyway. This is like, it's an invasion, right? It's invasion, but it's an invasion by a really powerful country. Maybe not as powerful as they seem. I think the war is wearing on them too. But it's a quagmire, right? And so, to your point, environmentally, it's a disaster. The more money we put into military, we hasten all of our demise in terms of the environment. So
yeah, it's a tough one. I've talked to Noam Chomsky about this issue. I've talked to Dave Troy. He's an investigative journalist about this issue. Everyone sees it as a proxy war. They don't like to say that in the media for some reason. And it's a NATO war in everything except name. So it becomes this. I don't think enough people really understand it. I certainly don't understand the nuances of why geopolitically it's important for us. We're basically matching our NATO contributions to just Ukraine without calling it a NATO war. And I just think it's pulling a fast one on the public.
Well, and also in the very early days, and perhaps Noam said this, but certainly I will. In the very early days before anything started, before the invasion, there were talks between Russia and Ukraine at that point. Even discussion about Crimea, even after the invasion there. And Russia's bottom line is, we don't want you to be part of NATO. And then it was the Americans and the British actually who spoke up and said, don't talk to them at all. Like, forget our support for you in anything if you do that. Yeah. So, of course, it's a proxy war. It's very much that way. And, and this is terrifying. It should terrify all of us. I think the money should be linked to ending the war. If it helps end the war, that's what we should all be looking at. And I'm sure they are too. This war got to end, and it can't end with more war. Right?
And it's one of two wars happening right now on the planet that people are keeping a close eye on. And the other one, of course, is Israel versus, I would say, instead of the Palestinians, I would say versus Hamas. It just makes more sense to me to say that. But unfortunately, the people that bear the brunt of Hamas and Israel going to war are the Palestinian people. At first, there was a too soon kind of vibe in the media about holding Netanyahu to task for being so heavy-handed. But 30,000 dead civilians later,
and half of them women and children.
and half the population there are women and
100
children. Yeah.
a day. 100 children a day was the last figure I saw. It's horrific.
How,
Now,
how,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. I just wanted to open with this.
Yeah.
Despite how anyone feels about this war, despite what side you might be on, if you happen to be on a side, I always like to say that when it comes to Israel and Hamas, I'm more of a spectator because I'm not educated enough to talk the history in detail. I only know what I see and what I hear. But really, at the end of the day, when I think about all of the civilians dying, I think of Netanyahu's politics more than I think of Israeli people. And I think that it's always important to separate the government from the people that government leads. Would we be seeing a different war if someone like cut from the same political cloth as like a Rabin or someone like that what would a more liberal Israeli prime minister have done, do you think? And I know it's a hard question to answer, it's hypothetical, but what do you think a more liberal Israeli prime minister would have done in the as a reaction to the October 7th terrorist attack?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, we have to remember the situation before any of this happened, before October 7th, and that was that tens of thousands of Israelis were in the streets trying to bring down the Netanyahu government. I mean, he was not popular at all. Now, the massacre, and to me, you can keep two ideas in your head at the same time, which seems so difficult these days. Yeah. But anyway, one idea is the Hamas massacre was a massacre. It was horrendous. I've heard from the victims. I mean, this was awful. No justification. Number two, there should have been a ceasefire, like right from the get-go, almost in Gaza. Like this is not a war. This is, one side has drones and planes and an air force, and the other side got not much, right?
Yeah.
And Hamas really was an occupier in Gaza in a sense. I mean, they haven't had an election for a long time, and even that election was kind of screwed, right? So, I mean, I've seen a lot of Palestinians talking on social media that have, come from Gaza who are not supporters of Hamas at all, but they're paying the price for this. And Israel knows that, they know that. They know they're killing 100 kids a day. They know they're, destroying hospitals. They won't let aid in. I mean, there's no justification for the way that this war is being waged upon Gaza. There's none. And I think it's time for a ceasefire. And sadly, that seems very difficult for people. I mean, 70% of Canadians support a ceasefire, yet our governments do not, right? So there it is.
There was a big trend of like maybe 3 weeks ago or a month ago where even if you suggested a ceasefire, people were like saying, "Oh, you're anti-Semitic," and it's like, and I know we're supposed to filter out that kind of toxicity online, but especially in October, November, it was mainstream to really label someone as something like that when you were just looking for peace, and I guess my question then to you would be, because Netanyahu chose this route, how many more Hamas fighters is he creating in the process with 15,000 children dead?
Every child that's being born. I mean, what he's done is he's fueled that particular fire for another generation at least. It did not need to be this way. And, this clearly, clearly a ceasefire needed to happen much before this. And one of the central arguments, I think, for anybody who, complains about that approach is that if the point was to save the hostages, this isn't the way to go about it. This is the way to make sure they're all killed by the time you even find them. So the families of the hostages are calling for, that's the reason they were supposed to be in there in the first place, is to rescue the hostages. Well, that hasn't happened. We know that some have died and more will die, and probably very few will be rescued because of this. So, I mean, and there's still a call for Netanyahu to step down. It's even louder now. So, I mean, this is not, and in terms of the resistance to it, absolutely, I have no problem people demonstrating outside the Israeli consulate or outside, MPPs or MPs' offices or whatever they need to do. Demonstrating in a Jewish neighborhood against Jews or against a Jewish school, that's anti-Semitic, right? Yeah. I mean, and we can keep two thoughts in our heads at the same time, right? Yeah. We can do that. And it seems so difficult to do, but it's, I think, actually the human thing to do.
Yeah, you're a good guest to have on to talk about. I'm glad you mentioned that the provocative protests that are happening. That is it's like the only way to protest nowadays. It seems to be somewhat provocative or disruptive or something. And I think that those types of protests have sort of are long past their expiry dates. I was watching. I was actually watching Spike Lee's Malcolm X like a week and a half ago or something like that. I like two Spike Lee movies. The rest of them I don't really care for, but Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X I really like a lot. But Malcolm X, the brilliant thing about, and I actually talked to a couple people. I talked to Seymour Hersh about this of all people because he was around back then, and the powerful symbol of like having protesters line up in formation, stand still, and remain quiet is so much more powerful than blocking traffic or bringing trucks to Capitol Hill or provocatively going into Jewish neighborhoods and being, I'm not an expert at protesting, but I know I've never been swayed by the let's make everyone else's life awful for a few hours in order to get our point across. Do you think that we have lost our ability to do protesting in an effective manner?
I don't know. I mean, you're speaking to a woman who, for a while there, this is pre-COVID. Every Wednesday, I think it was every Wednesday, we shut down Yonge and Dundas for 15 minutes only. For 15 minutes.
See, you're thoughtful about it then.
And we had dancers, we had speakers. It was for climate action. But it was only 15 minutes. The cops didn't even give us a hard time. And it was, the drivers honked their horns or whatever, and then went on. But yeah, I mean, I think, organizing is the only way organizing masses of people is really the only way to resist political action by the governments. But also there's another way, and that is turn up to vote, and also lobby politicians. I mean, you don't have to be rich. You don't have to be a huge corporation to be a lobbyist. One of the most effective lobbyists that's ever crossed my path was a trans woman on ODSP who just didn't say no and just made sure she visited everybody at Queen's Park all the time. So, I mean, anybody can be a lobbyist. Anybody can go out and vote and organize to get somebody elected or get them unelected. And anybody can be part of a peaceful demonstration. This is, our right, and it is effective. I was part of in 1971. I was the only woman to sign on to the We Demand, which was the first gay demonstration back then on Parliament Hill, and we were just a small group of utopian hippies. And we had this huge list of demands, things like not being fired, things like having access to kids.
Were you called the utopian hippies?
We were,
because the acronym doesn't do you any favors, right?
Well, I mean, the reality is we didn't expect any of this stuff to ever happen. We really didn't. And there weren't very many of us, and we won everything. We won every single thing. Now, so all I'm saying is that it always starts with a handful of people, but it also ends up in laws changing. So don't stop, but be smart about it, is what I would say.
I have noticed in the last, 6 months or something, I don't think I'm becoming more conservative. I don't. But there are a few issues that have really caused other people to call me a right winger, and I was just a little surprised. So I'm a father of two, 9 and 7. My kid has a cell phone, but I've taken the internet off of it. So it's just because I'm separated from his mom, so we can get a hold of each other without having to go through mom. And Poilievre offered up something last week, and he got shat on for it. I'm not one person that shat on for it. In fact, the small praise that I gave him was that I have not actually heard a politician even bring up this subject, and I think it's really important, which is the horrifically easy access to adult content that any kid with a cell phone has these days. Now, I don't care if he's motivated by placating to the far right. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that once I put the blockers on my kids' devices and they go to school, other kids don't have blockers on their devices. And I'm wondering, I don't think I'm a prude. In fact, I fucking know I'm not a prude. But I am very much worried about the 10-year-old James, who saw pornography for the first time because one of his friend's brothers showed him a VHS tape, and I was just completely traumatized. I won't obviously go into detail what it was, but I was far too young to see what I was seeing. And then I started to imagine what it would be like if I had some magical device that would give me that whenever I wanted, and I just don't even know what would have happened to James in that case. Is there anything that can sort of be done besides being good parents when it comes to the internet's seemingly unabashed idea of pornography for everybody?
Well, I mean, I think the government is trying to do something where children are concerned, right? Like I just heard about it, but there's no details, so who knows what it actually looks like in reality. The Trudeau government. But
Is that
I mean,
the online harms bill?
yeah, yeah.
The only mention of pornography in that is pornography that feature children, not children digesting it.
I know. I mean, here's the problem. In a kind of horrible way, the horse is out of the barn. I mean, and with like, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you put the blockers on, you do what you can. I mean, what I used to do with my kids is because, the same thing, it was far less dramatic back then. I mean, they're
Yeah.
adults. But I mean, what I would do is, if they wanted to watch, in my case, was all like, I was like so anti-violence. There wasn't so much access to pornography as there was just everybody's killing everybody. It was getting, video games are really bloody.
Yeah.
So I would, but if I said no, they'd go to their friend's house and play it there. So just like you say, if you block here, they go to class. So what I would do is if they insisted that they wanted, I wouldn't buy them, but if they got them and they wanted to watch them, I would sit there and be that really, horrible parent that sits and says, do you really think this is okay? Or, don't you think there's a better way of resolving that conflict, and make it so horrible to watch the movie or to do the thing. But
they keep on associating pornography with their mom. Oh my God.
It's pretty effective, to just like put the kibosh on everything that your mom's going to be there, So all I'm saying is that I think, if you're trying to prevent them seeing anything like, it is traumatic, and I fear it's a losing battle. And the best we can do is keep the really horrendous stuff hopefully out of reach, which I hope.
Yeah.
But again, like
I joked the other day about how when I was a kid, discovering your dad's Playboy centerfold was the thing that gave you the adrenaline spike. And today there's like gangbangs on demand, and it is a totally different landscape. It is not even close to being the same, right?
I mean, this is where I think, I mean, to me, education is the answer to a lot of our issues. Education, like people objected to sex education, and then their kid goes and watches gangbangs on demand, right? I think what you need is really good sex education that's inclusive, that's fair, and you need to start it early enough that you're counteracting what they're seeing. That's not, not joyous sexuality, but like something else entirely, right? Because you're not going to stop it. It's everywhere, right? You're not going to stop it. So that's the sad reality.
And the other issue is then Danielle Smith. And I'm just going to put all my cards on the table. And I think this speaks to how issues aren't properly laid out for people to really understand what's going on. I have a great relationship with my kids. Now, they're 9 and 7. I'm hopeful that I get to maintain an open sort of line of communication with them. And if we do, I don't want my teacher shielding me from anything. So I'm wondering if the idea of what the spirit of her bill seems anti-trans to me, right?
It is, absolutely.
Yes. But we don't always follow the spirit of legislation and policy, and sometimes things get lost in the swamp. So, like, if my child, who I have a great relationship with, and they're 13 or 14, tell their teacher that they had sex, and then the teacher doesn't tell me, I'm going to be pissed off at that teacher. And I know the teacher wants to protect the child from a potential harmful situation at home. But is there going to be some sort of negative ancillary and unintended impacts for good parents for a bill like that?
Now, first of all,
sorry for what she's changing. So the policy that she's changing.
What she's talking about is teachers outing trans children and non-binary children to their parents.
That's right.
Using the pronouns. She's not talking about sex. I use the example. I said, what if your teacher, when you started having sex as a teenager, told your parents about you having sex, what would you feel about that? And you're heterosexual, cisgendered, right? I mean, first of all, this is not
Allegedly. Sorry.
allegedly. So, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, first of all, if you have a great relationship with your child and they are exploring their gender or their sexuality or anything else, they're going to, certainly with pronouns, we're talking about pronouns. If they want to be called they, them, or he, him, or she, her, and it doesn't fit their biology or whatever, I mean, they're going to be telling their parents. I know lots and lots of families in this situation where they have trans children or non-binary children that are exploring their gender. And they talk to their parents, and their parents listen, and they're cool. And if they're not cool and they don't understand it, they get some advice, and they, go see a, doctor or therapist or something, right? So they deal with it. But it's the kids whose parents, what this is going to do is put children at risk, their very lives at risk. That's what it's going to do, because children aren't telling their parents something for which they're going to be blamed or punished or hit or abused or, sent off to, conversion therapy by some religious quack. So, I mean, this is what's going to happen. And I have full confidence, because I talk to teachers all the time, that they will not do this. So, these ridiculous premiers can override human rights, which is what they're doing, overriding the human rights of the land for all they want. But teachers are not going to betray the confidence of their students, and they shouldn't.
Teachers, and I know a bunch of teachers. I haven't asked them, but maybe you've talked to them. Isn't there a sort of, facet of good teachers that already sort of practice being confidential with their students when it comes to certain things?
Absolutely.
Doesn't that already exist?
Of course it does. Most teachers do. And if it's a question of abuse, there are laws in place. They have to report abuse, and they do, to the authorities, right? Whether it's happening at home or somewhere else, right? So that's different. But where it's just to do with the kids' sexuality or their gender questions, this is private stuff. You don't want your teacher, if you confide in them. You don't want anybody, if you confide in them, to tell somebody else. And children have rights, and this is overriding them.
Yeah, we're both Italian. I think I'm half Italian. I don't know about you, but I'm half Italian.
Me too, half Italian.
Yeah, I'm half Dutch, half Italian. So I'm literally my own worst enemy. But the idea of I often joke that when my daughter was born, I went from 50% Italian to 476% Italian, right? And I'm not an overbearing dad like that, and I don't ever want to be. But I want to be allies with my teacher, and I want my kids to feel comfortable enough to talk to me about certain things. And I think this issue, because I'm not just talking about the Danielle Smith side, I'm just talking about how we hear about this in BC and Ontario, or we used to in Ontario, about how there's going to be legislation to protect LGBT communities while at school and everything. And all I kept on thinking was, am I going to be left out of the loop as a dad? Like, I just want to be able to remain in the loop. And I think the reason why I'm saying that is because I think there's a lot of very well-meaning parents out there who might not have a very good grasp of what it even means to be a transgendered person, but that just wants to make sure that no one interferes with their parenting of their child. And I don't feel that this issue has been explained well enough to them. And I think that people that are sort of criticizing Danielle Smith, I think those critics would have more allies if they just found a way to explain to parents, we're not trying to take away parenting from good parents. Because that's what my initial reaction was. I'm like, how dare you? And then now I've become more evolved on this issue. The Eager Beaver podcast guys have good shows where they talk about it, and I learn a lot, and I want to keep learning. And I'm just wondering, I think there's other parents like me out there that just don't realize it, but they will evolve on this issue if it's explained better.
Absolutely. And so that's what I try to do when I speak to teachers' organizations, which I do a lot. And it even comes down to scripture and sometimes, which is hilarious but true. I mean, teachers need to know, have armor, and I think parents do too. Parents need information, and they need to educate themselves. But I mean, there's lots of. I mean, I didn't talk to my parents about who I was having sex with. I don't think if I talked to my teacher and they were a friend, I wouldn't want my teacher to talk to my parents about who I'm having sex with or thinking about having sex with. And honestly, that's just that's called being a good friend. And my kids, I mean, think about it. You could be the best parent in the world and your kid's not going to necessarily talk to you about those things. And, you know, you don't want to force that, because guess what will happen is if the teacher tells you and the kid didn't want them to, that's going to really harm your relationship. And that child will never, ever, they won't have somebody to confide in. You're taking away their person to confide in that situation. Just like they may confide in you about stuff and not tell your friends or not tell their teacher about things. I mean, we've got to, you know, we respect our children's right to privacy. It should be their call, not a teacher's or a parent's, right, who they confide in.
Yeah, and one of those aspects about this issue that a lot of parents don't know about is that it is almost zero the amount of people under the age of 18 who get certain types of surgery associated with being trans. And I think, listen, I'm always one of those people that, like, if
hormone
you're
blockers. We were just talking about this on my show today. Or hormone blockers, none of that. And first of all, you know what's really interesting? You know, straight people, cisgendered people, forget that they use blockers, they use testosterone, they use estrogen, they use hormones, and actually puberty blockers have been used by the medical profession for decades before there were any issues around. Yeah,
gymnasts
because
use them. Yeah.
Well, and also just for kids who have medical issues, who maybe started, you know, little girls that started their periods at 8 or something, or like they're legitimate medical reasons for hormone use for both adults and children at times, for a very minority. And we're talking about such a minority here, a really small minority of children, right? And there is no, like, this does not happen. I mean, no intervention happens until months of therapy, you know, everybody's involved. I mean, this is not like, you know, you decide when you're 9 that you're going to be, you know, you're born a boy, but you're going to be a girl, and all of a sudden they're performing surgery on you. This is what the right would want you to believe. This is not, this is an urban myth, just like
this
guys,
is also
you know,
what I
dressing up as
think,
women to get into girls.
sorry to cut you off, Cheri, but yeah, this is also what I think conservative parents or even moderate parents, they, you know, they believe that like the worst parts of it because they're not educated. Like, you can start with Danielle Smith's office and send a crew over there to, like, explain to them what the statistics are, show them the data, you know, just with a nonpartisan kind of vibe, just like, here you go. I think there will be, for the very first time ever, trickle down might work, where it will be trickle down information, where these people will finally understand, no, it's nothing what you think it is. I guess I have more faith, I think, in citizens' ability to be educated on something. I know no one agrees with me on that, honestly. We're in a soundbite culture, you know?
But I mean, here's the thing. Yeah, I don't think Danielle Smith or Mo or any of these people, or some 300 bills that are on the books of the states, including one to take away trans children from their parents. So talking about not consulting.
What?
All of these bills are happening. It's the 1930s all over again. And this is something that people don't know, but if there's some great documentaries on this issue that show that one of the first targeted groups in Berlin were trans folk, because they were tended to be obvious, and they carried papers then because it was very open back then, and they had sex reassignment surgeries and everything. Berlin was a second, you know, it was a center for that in all of Europe. So I mean, this is history, and honestly, I don't think Danielle Smith and Mo really care. This is a wedge issue for the ultra right. And that's how it's being used. How do we pick on a group that's so small, such a minority, so misunderstood, so little education about, and make them the target? And then people will spread all sorts of urban myths and fear tactics. And then, you know, we'll gain some more traction this way. This is the point of this. And, you know, this is, again, this is political. It's not... I don't think they care about the science. I don't think they would be swayed by scientific evidence. I think they just see it as a wedge issue that are going to get some people on side that weren't on side before.
Yeah, wedge issues in politics are never going to go away. Let's bounce around a little bit. Do you have a little bit more time? Okay.
I do.
Okay, good. Because I have ADHD, this isn't called rapid fire, but it probably will end up like that. I'm just going to bounce around a little bit. Joe Biden. Should they replace him at the convention this summer and run a candidate that has more vigor and energy to run against Trump?
You're glitching a little bit. Could you repeat that?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Is this better?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Joe Biden.
I don't know. I never know. So go ahead.
Joe Biden. Should they replace him at the convention?
I think it's too late.
Yeah.
I think it's too late.
The last time it happened was when Robert Kennedy was killed, and I think they ran Humphreys that year. But yeah, Johnson resigned because he thought Kennedy would win. Kennedy ended up getting assassinated, and then they put Humphreys in, and they lost. I personally don't think he's capable of spending another 4 years in the White House. And I'm not a Trump fan, and I wouldn't vote for Trump. I would vote for this before I'd vote for Trump, but we might be getting this running against Trump, right?
Yeah, I think the center is falling out in politics everywhere, globally. And I think Biden has made some critical errors in that regard, has disregarded the left wing of his base. And the thing is, those people will stay home and they won't vote. And that's the nightmare. So it really is devil in deep blue sea. And it's sad that, folk in the Democratic Party didn't see this earlier, didn't see it when Hillary ran, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Trudeau that we've got up here, is that when Poilievre talks about elites, well, yeah, those should be our words on the left, quite frankly, but talks about elites, and we nod because they are. I mean, Trudeau, they're elites. Come on, they are. And when he says have-nots against have-yachts, we love that. We should be talking about that. He's talking about it. Now, he doesn't really mean it. I mean, he's funded by large corporations. So, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's like the left has to get their act together. We have to get our act together if we're going to take on what's happening historically.
There appears to be inside the Ottawa bubble, inside the Liberal caucus especially, this idea that this is one of those elections where people have regime fatigue. The public in general has had enough of Trudeau, not his fans, but that's why you see someone like Poilievre so high in the polls. And that the conventional wisdom, although I don't think there is any anymore, but this seems to be consistent, where if you have a candidate that the party thinks might be viable, like a Chrystia Freeland or a Mark Carney or something like that they are gun shy about replacing Trudeau because they think the next election is already lost. Is that your read on it as well?
Well, what I think is there's kind of a Trudeau cult that happened in the Liberal Party federally. And they really thought, I mean, he was an international celebrity. I mean, he looks sort of like Elvis to me. But anyway, like the guy's hot, right?
Apparently it's Castro, not Elvis. Yeah.
I would travel around, at a certain point, and it was kind of Trudeau mania, right? And somehow they think that wouldn't go away, and it has. And it has a hugely effective global campaign against him, right? And now they feel like they don't have any alternatives. And again, they've left it too late. So, I mean, I think that's what you've got going on there, kind of tunnel vision. So, and I think, again, where's the NDP? We should have been not associating with them, not making, not great deals with them in my books. We should have been seen as distinct from them, not as their research and development wing. And then we would have had a chance because the center's dropping out. But we didn't. And so looks like we got work to do, my friend. Looks like we got work.
I feel sorry for Singh. I feel sorry for Jagmeet Singh because he's just, like there's so much promise. There was so much promise there. And now he's seen as somebody who is taking kind of superficial shots at Trudeau, making a deal with one hand and giving him the finger with the other hand kind of thing. And it's not working. Like it doesn't mix well. Do you think that they are is the next election it for Singh, or do you think that he might overstay his welcome like many other leaders before him?
Well, we'll see. We'll live to see that. But again, it seems to me that in politics, You've got to be bold, and you've got to stand on principle. And you don't have to agree. We don't want a one-party state. You can have differences of opinion and differences in ideology, but you got to have one. You got to have something. People have to know who you are and why you're different from that guy, right? And if you don't do that, you may save a seat or two. And I think that's the great fear in the Liberal and NDP federal circles, is that they're going to be decimated. And the problem is that we become what we fear, and we bring about what we fear. So fear not, said some guy that I preach about on Sundays. Don't be frightened. Actually be bold, and actually, show what I think should be your real colors. And that's not what I see happening in politics up here.
I see, and I'll end it with this. We'll go back to Ontario, your stomping grounds, and Miss Stiles, the leader of the NDP, just found herself, according to the latest polls, and I don't put a lot of stock in polls, but whatever, is now in second place. Was the Bonnie Crombie leadership, was that her being voted in as leader, is that a smart move by the Liberals or a gamble? Because I find her to be a little Ford light in her politics.
I mean, she is a little Ford light in her politics. I mean, this is the strength of the provincial Liberal brand. And I think to your earlier point about how we vote separately from federal, I think people are getting really terrified of a Poilievre federal government. So I think that's giving some wind in the Liberal sails here in the provincial level. But remember, she doesn't even have a seat. She doesn't even have a seat. Yeah. They don't even have party status. People forget this. I don't know. I'm a Mart fan and supported her leadership. I think if we get our acts together, we've still got some time. Yeah.
Cheri DiNovo, always a pleasure to have you on the show. I always get good feedback. People tell me I'm more well behaved when you're here, so thank you for that.
Always a pleasure, James. Love your show.
You can come back anytime. Thanks very much.
Take care.
See you soon.
Bye.
Cheri DiNovo. Oh, I always feel like I'm learning something when Cheri's on the show. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I have on good authority that I should be interviewing rabble rouser and controversial, whatever the hell he actually is. I'm going to try to make it a civil interview with David Parker, but I'm curious to know or to figure out why he seems to have so much power when he seems to have such bad ideas. So we'll figure that out. Casual Friday is on today. As you can see, I'm back in my stomping grounds. My cat is on the desk. I really hate it when he does that. But thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next time on Blackballed.
Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.